Welcome back to the Business of Biotech. I'm your host, Ben Comer, Chief Editor at Life Science Leader, and today I'm speaking with Alan Bash, President of Carvykti at Legend Biotech. Alan is an experienced executive and company leader. He began his career with a 22-year stint at Bristol Myers Squibb, working in various product and commercial functions, and then served as CEO at both Checkmate Pharmaceuticals and ZielBio. He joined Legend Biotech in 2024 to oversee Carvykti, a J&J partnered CAR T therapy for multiple myeloma, first approved by FDA in 2022. Carvykti is a blockbuster product, meaning that it's a product with annual sales revenues exceeding $1 billion, but new competition from other products may be just around the corner. We'll discuss Legend's partnership with J&J, how to grow an autologous cell therapies footprint, and increase patient access, and how the company thinks about late-stage competitors potentially entering the market. Thank you so much for being here, Alan.
Great to be here, Ben.
Before we get really started in earnest, Alan, I noticed at the bottom of your LinkedIn page that you were once upon a time a USA Today reporter. I believe that was in the 90s. Can you tell me a little bit
That's right.
about that experience?
That's right. That was my first job out of college. I was a newspaper reporter. I like to say that I had the best beat in the industry because I covered the television industry. So I got to meet celebrities from TV and film, and I wrote about it for USA Today, which is everybody's favorite paper when they're traveling in a hotel.
What a great gig.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Some of the late night hosts, David Letterman and Jay Leno, are folks I got to meet, and
Wow.
some of the TV shows that were filmed on the New York lot. So it was a great gig for a young person.
All right. Well, you didn't stick with it though. Entertainment was not the beat you wanted to pursue forever, I suppose. You went to Columbia Business School, and then into the life sciences sector with BMS. Why the drug industry? What interested you about the sector initially?
When I went to business school, I really got enamored with this concept of a mission-driven industry. And I had a number of colleagues and professors who had been working on boards of various companies. And, I just got very excited by the prospect of being able to work in an industry that was obviously profit-focused and business-focused, but also at the same time had a very core mission in terms of helping patients and improving health. And so BMS was a wonderful company to join. I went through a leadership development program there, worked through various
Mm.
commercial roles, throughout all the various areas where BMS had a commercial footprint or a therapeutic area of focus. I had a chance to spend time on, and it was just an excellent way for me to see the pharmaceutical industry kind of at its best, if you will. And we can talk about it. I ended up transitioning to smaller companies, but that's why I joined BMS, and that's why I had such a rewarding career there.
On the leadership program at BMS, was that something, that they identified you for and asked you if you wanted to be a part of? Was it something that you kind of applied for? I'm just curious, how you got in. It sounds like a fantastic program, and I know other big pharma companies have similar programs as well, but I'm just curious about how you got kind of hooked into that.
Several companies have these types of programs, and yeah, I was fortunate enough to be selected for it. It was a class of new recruits, if you will, and each year, the company would recruit a new set of candidates from various business schools. And I think even till this day, BMS and other large pharma companies have this type of program. I think it's really great because when someone's starting out, you don't really know which part of the business you're interested in, whether it's marketing, sales, market access, market research, analytics. And I think for someone to get a flavor, and it was a rotational program where I had a chance to move through different roles over the course of 3 years, it really gives you a broad view on the business.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you got to kind of bounce around in
Yeah,
was it like
primarily
all
commercial
commercial
roles.
function,
Yeah,
mostly
yeah,
commercial functions, it sounds like. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, and so then you I mentioned in the intro you were at BMS for 22 years. Did you through that program identify, a specialty that, was particularly compelling for you, or what else, I guess, would you say about that 22-year experience there?
If I look back on that part of my career, the most important aspect for me and the biggest highlight, and frankly the most rewarding for me, was working on the checkpoint inhibitors. So Bristol Myers Squibb had the CTLA-4 Yervoy checkpoint inhibitor. That was the sort of the first one, and then came the PD-1s, right? And obviously today, if you look at the marketplace, Keytruda is the top selling drug. I think maybe now being eclipsed by some of the GLPs, but from an oncology standpoint, the PD-1s really revolutionized the treatment of cancer using the body's own immune system in new ways and expanding it to so many different indications. And I was very fortunate to be part of that journey. We had Opdivo, which was the PD-1 that was the main competitor to Keytruda. We also had Yervoy. We worked on the combination of the two. We were expanding it into new geographies, new indications, earlier lines. So it was in the adjuvant and peri-adjuvant setting. So that for me was the best part of, when I think about my career there, that was my favorite set of roles, which is working on the immune checkpoint inhibitors.
Yeah, absolutely. And then at what point did you decide, that you wanted to dip a toe in biotech and move into company leadership? How did that come about?
Well, I was thinking about it for quite some time, and the opportunity presented itself for me to, at some point, in any career, you get a little bit too comfortable, and you're coming to work every day and you're saying this is great, but the other side of you is saying, you're getting a little too comfortable, Alan. There's no growth in the comfort zone, and there's no comfort in the growth zone, as they say.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to try something different, and so I was recruited to become the CEO of a small public biotech in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Checkmate Pharmaceuticals. That, in terms of the checkpoint inhibitors and working on the adaptive immunity side, this was working on the innate immunity side and complementary mechanisms to the PD-1s. And so Checkmate Pharmaceuticals was a great place for me to explore the world of biotech and sort of the ways that smaller companies collaborate with bigger companies. And in fact, Regeneron was one of the companies that had a clinical collaboration with Checkmate. And I was not there too long for a period of time, but Regeneron came along and saw our data and got very excited by it and ended up purchasing Checkmate. And so that was a good outcome for a small biotech that had been looking for its next stage.
Yeah, absolutely. What could you say, I guess, about your role in that sale? I mean, was it something that you were negotiating with Regeneron? Obviously, they were partners maybe before you started, took the lead role at Checkmate. I'm not sure, but well, let me ask this. What was kind of the most eye-opening thing about moving from BMS into biotech? And then what can you say about the experience of that Regeneron acquisition?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. First of all, you're absolutely right. Regeneron had a clinical collaboration with Checkmate. So this predated my joining the company. And in fact, while I was there, and it was only a short period of time, it really moved very, very quickly. They saw our data. We were able to conclude a deal with them fairly rapidly. A number of, my team members were heavily involved in that. Our head of BD, their head of BD. And really it was, and then to link it to your other question about the experience, for a small company that had basically one program, in the clinic, you're really at a crossroads. Are you going to try to get more money and invest and go beyond sort of where you are today? Or are you going to try to do an acquisition, or are you going to try to do some sort of partnership? If you partner your lead asset, do you have enough value in the pipeline? So for small biotechs, it's all about cash runway. And so we were always thinking about how much cash runway we had, and that was forcing strategic choices. And that was part of the calculation to do a deal with Regeneron. And so I think that was the biggest learning for me. At Big Pharma, you never have to worry about that. You have to deal with budgets and P&L, but in small biotech, cash is oxygen. And if you don't have that runway, then it really forces your hand in different ways. So that was I think an obvious learning for those of you who are in this business a long time, but for me coming from big pharma into small biotech, that was the biggest takeaway.
So Regeneron took out Checkmate. You then went over to ZielBio as a CEO, I believe, right?
Yes.
What can you tell me about that company?
That was an interesting company because that was looking at novel targets for cancer on certain types of cancer, a protein that was expressed on the cell surface. But it was very early. We did have a clinical program, but the science really was still evolving. And to just kind of be brief on the story about Zeal, at the end of the day, that was a situation where the science did not progress sufficiently enough for us to have conviction around the targets that we were pursuing. And frankly, our investors couldn't get conviction around it. So as we went out to try to raise more money or get more money from existing investors, it always comes down to the science. And they looked very, carefully at the science and they said, we just don't have enough here to feel comfortable about moving the company forward. And so we made a difficult decision. I recommended it to the board. The board accepted it that we needed to, wrap up operations and fold down the company. It's unfortunately a storyline that happens to many, many small biotechs.
Absolutely,
Again,
yeah.
limited cash, limited shots on goal. You have to take some bets. Sometimes it works out. We always like to see the ones that kind of made it through the gauntlet and say why they were so smart. But for unfortunately for small biotechs, again, it's the bet that doesn't win that is more often happening. And so we are only as good as the science can deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. And, making that choice, you submitted this proposal to wrap up operations, which couldn't have been an easy decision to make. But, how much worse would it have been to continue kind of treading water and progress at trying to get more money in when ultimately, it became obvious, it sounds like, that you weren't going to be able to progress it. So, I mean, that's a tough but critical decision, I
It's
think.
it's a tough call, and I think the existing investors for sure appreciated that because they
Yeah.
need to move on at some point too, and so this was the best possible outcome given the circumstances.
Yeah, and getting to that decision,
Yeah,
sooner than later,
yeah.
obviously is the best way to go. So, that was ZielBio. What circumstances brought you to Legend?
Well, yeah. So if I connect, I was in a large pharma company for many years. I did two very small biotechs, and I personally was looking for something in a happy medium. And
The
actually, if I
Goldilocks
think
company.
the
Yeah.
Goldilocks company, exactly. And if I think about Legend, Legend is an extremely unique position. It's a small to mid-sized pharma company. It's a public company. We have an approved therapy, which is doing, extremely well in the marketplace today. And I'm excited to tell you more about that in terms of Carvykti. But we also have, $900+ million in the bank. We have a pipeline. We have a large workforce. We have established set of capabilities. So this isn't a small company where one trial is going to mean that, the demise or the fate of a company, but rather it's a company that has not only an approved therapy, but a pipeline. It has resources, but it's small enough. We absolutely operate the way a biotech you want a biotech to operate, which is small, very fast decision making, working quickly, focused on the science, delivering value to customers as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So it does feel for me, and I think for a lot of employees, like that Goldilocks situation where you have the large pharma potential, but you have the small company mindset.
Now, were you familiar with key executives or board of directors at Legend, before you came, or were you meeting everyone kind of for the first time? What was that like?
Well, we always cross paths with different people in the industry. So we had a lot of people in
Sure.
common, but I had not worked with the team at Legend. But again, as the conversations went, I started to realize we had more connections, as we went.
Well, let's talk about Carvykti. I mentioned in the intro it's a CAR T cell therapy for multiple myeloma. It was the second CAR T approved for multiple myeloma behind BMS's Abecma in 2021. Um, it's been called a functional cure, and it's the current leader, I think, in sales and market share for this modality, CAR T, in this indication. Um, Drug launches, and this is a big windup, so bear with me, Alan.
Yeah.
But drug launches have gotten a lot harder in recent years. What do you think are are some of the contributing factors to the commercial success of Carvykti so far?
Yeah, and so just to put some facts around that commercial success, so we just had our quarterly earnings call for Q4, and in Q4 of 2025, we had sales of $555 million. And if you compare that to any other CAR T on the market, that's by far and away the largest selling CAR T across all the CAR T spaces, lymphoma, myeloma, and anything else out there.
Okay, across all
And
indications,
across
yeah.
all indications, right? Not just even in the myeloma space. We're number one. And then you couple that with the fact that we have now treated 10,000 patients with Carvykti. So since the initial clinical trials and then through the original indication, which you mentioned was in 2022, through the commercial production and all the clinical programs, we have treated 10,000 patients. And that's just an incredible number. If you think about autologous CAR T, we're taking patients' cells, we are bringing them to our manufacturing plant. We are re-engineering the T cells, and about a month later, we are reinfusing those same cells to the patient. All of that has to happen in exquisite choreography, and we've done it 10,000 times. So, that's a real high watermark for the industry, for the CAR T industry. And again, from here, we just continue to build and show that we can continue to scale even further. Now, just to answer your question about the launch, because I know that you're absolutely right. Launches are getting harder and harder. I think for Carvykti, when it was coming into the market as a late line treatment for relapsed refractory myeloma, it was originally the original studies were in fifth line or beyond, and that was the indication, upon which it was approved by the FDA and EMA in 2022. It was primarily about the data. I mean, the data was just a rock star. It showed overall survival data. It showed long-term PFS data, and it showed it in a way that was with a manageable safety profile. And the efficacy, because at the end of the day, we're talking about patients with significant morbidity and mortality. They want to know if the treatment's going to work, if it's going to really prolong their life and get them off other treatments. The PFS data and the OS data that was shown in that CARTITUDE-1 study was just by far and away better than what the original therapy that you mentioned from BMS had in the market. And so that's really what made Carvykti take off.
Yeah.
And like other CAR Ts, we actually couldn't keep up from a supply standpoint with the demand. There were waiting lists. We had centers having to allocate what we called allocation of slots. And those were the early days of Carvykti. Now the story has completely changed. And we can talk more about that, but that was what the launch felt like. It was actually, there was more demand in the market than we had supply.
Yeah, and that's a difficult situation to be in. Patients waiting to get this, therapy and not being able to get it right away. I did want to ask you dig into this a little bit. You've treated 10,000 patients now. You must have gotten, and you mentioned, exquisite choreography going into this autologous process for administering the therapy to patients. What, I guess, could you say about learnings, after thinking about, 10,000 patients done, now you've gotten into a process that is, successful and works and is efficient, I assume. Is there any, and I guess I'm thinking about other leaders potentially, out there listening and or developing autologous therapies. What learnings would you say, Alan? What tweaks did you have to make? What fixes were needed to kind of get that process into shape where you could turn up the scale to that extent?
Yeah, and so and just to be clear, a lot of this great work predated me joining the company, but I think there are a couple of important takeaways that Legend has been able to demonstrate through this. And first of all, one is the partnership with J&J, and partnerships come in all flavors and shapes and sizes. But the way this one came about was that Legend presented the original data sets back in 2017 at ASCO, and basically, as people tell the story, like the jaws just dropped in terms of the efficacy. And J&J, team members and leaders were in the audience, and they got very excited by looking at this data, and they said, "There's probably something here." Now, to be honest, and this has been in the public record, I'm not saying anything new. There was skepticism because the data was from original, from trials in China, And so the question was, will this translate to an FDA filing? Can we replicate this in a global study? Is the data real? That was a question that was on the minds of people in 2017. And J&J very proudly likes to tell people that, they went to China, they did the diligence, they looked through all the patient records, they did all the documentation reviews, and they brought the J&J, they brought the J&J rigor, and they said, does this hold up? And they came back with an exclamation point, yes, it does. And so that's why J&J was willing to do a collaboration with Legend. And so I think your first part of it is, these small biotechs, they want to do everything themselves, and that's the dream. But to scale manufacturing for autologous CAR T, to commercialize in a highly competitive marketplace like myeloma, where better could you be than to partner with the myeloma leader, which is J&J? And so the partnership is number one, a key to success. That's for sure number one. And then the second thing I would say is, any given day at a company, whether you're a small company, large company, or wherever you are in the company, there's day-to-day fire drills, and then there's the long-term planning. And I think Legend did a really good job of trying to navigate both. It worked really hard to navigate the day-to-day. How do we deliver this product, and trying to be receptive to customer needs and trying to improve the process, while at the same time thinking long-term. So thinking about things like, how are we going to scale and manufacture this in Europe? And again, through the partnership with J&J, it was identified that we would start manufacturing construction and plans in Belgium, in the city of Ghent. And so now today, only a few short years later, when the teams originally were looking at just a greenfield, what they call a greenfield in manufacturing world, right? It was just grass at a tech park. Now we have two facilities that are approved for commercial production in Ghent, supporting the European markets. They're near each other. One is called Obelisc, and the other one is a larger facility that we just got commercial approval last year for, which is called Tech Lane. And this is now supporting significant demand coming from the European launches. So I use that as an example to say, you got the fire drills today and putting out the fires today, and the short-term deliverables, and then looking ahead where you need to go and building for the future as well.
Yeah, I think it would, maybe it's fair to say, correct me if I'm wrong, that Legend would probably not be able to stand up a lot of new manufacturing facilities in Europe and continue to expand patient access all over the world by itself. Is that correct?
We absolutely, value and rely on the partnership we have with J&J, and I think they would say the same thing. And it's really about both companies bringing something to the table. We brought a lot of the knowledge about the construct and about the therapy and about the science behind Carvykti, and then what J&J brought was the scale, right? The commercial scale, the opportunity to do clinical development together, and then the manufacturing piece. So it really is that magic combination between what biotech and big pharma can do together.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, to its credit, J&J saw the potential of this product, early on, when there was
Right.
when there was skepticism. I think everyone has sort of come around on Chinese biotech at this point,
Absolutely.
but at the time, J&J was sort of taking a chance. I think it's unquestionable that it was a transformative partnership for Legend. You've just been speaking about it. But I wonder if there are any negatives about a large, big pharma partnership partnering with the biotech, and maybe you don't have to speak specifically to gripes with J&J, but what would you say for company leaders at biotechs who cash is oxygen, as you said, they're trying to progress assets, looking for funding wherever it may reside. What would you say to those leaders as far as things to consider or maybe to watch out for in a partnership with a much larger company, understanding that that they're able to offer things that that you couldn't do alone?
I've been in a lot of joint ventures. I mean, a number of the products that were at BMS were joint ventures as well. There was a very large antiplatelet category, and Plavix clopidogrel was the market leader, and that was a partnership between BMS and Sanofi, for example. And so in any partnership, you really have to make sure it's clear about what each party is bringing to the table and have open communication, good governance, building trust among the parties, and making sure that your values and your goals for the product are aligned. Another product that I worked very closely on throughout my years at BMS was an antiplatelet, Eliquis, an anticoagulant, Eliquis, which is a partnership with Pfizer, which is one of the largest products in the marketplace today, helping millions and millions of patients. And I remember the early days when BMS and Pfizer were getting together around just setting up the foundation of a good partnership, and we had similar goals and our vision for the product. Same thing with a small biotech. They sometimes have their baby, right, their molecule or their program, and they're worried about sort of what it's going to mean with a larger pharmaceutical partnership. But again, I think if you hold true to what you want the product to be in your vision, and you find a partner that shares that vision, but then can bring the capabilities, the resources, the expertise in certain areas, I think that's where, it's a starting point for success. Then, you get into the partnership, and, I would be lying to you if I said every day was roses and, flowers with the partnership.
Sure.
We always have debates, and we have discussions. But at the end of the day, we have a very strong partnership with J&J that allows us to work hand in hand on looking at the long-term vision for Carvykti. And the long-term vision is, this is a one-time infusion that has the potential to bring cure to patients in multiple myeloma where the disease was never considered to be curable. Both companies are firmly committed to that vision, that this can become a standard of care for patients in all lines of therapy in multiple myeloma. And together, we have the opportunity to fulfill that vision. I don't think either one could do that alone. And so, we keep our eye on the prize, if you will, curing patients with myeloma. I mean, period, full stop. That's our goal. And so, I think that's really a key part of the partnership with it, which is both companies. I can tell you very specifically, we were just in discussions this week with senior leaders at J&J. And again, we both reiterated our commitment that Carvykti is an extremely unique therapy that has curative intent, curative potential, and that we want to bring that one-time infusion to more patients.
Yeah, I mean, it goes without saying that it's the significance of a one-time treatment. I am curious about how it's administered in terms of the setting and, what the kind of patient experience looks like. Does a patient have to be admitted to the hospital to receive Carvykti?
So Carvykti has a really unique model. So what happens in the patient journey is as follows. At some point, the patient has been, assessed to be relapsing on their prior treatments, and the patient then will basically be sort of a candidate for CAR T. And right now, Carvykti can be administered in certain authorized treatment centers. That's the model that autologous CAR T uses. If you look at others in the industry as well. So we have 145 authorized treatment centers in the U.S. They're scattered geographically, obviously some concentrated in some large, cities as well. And we have basically a footprint that enables us to say that 80% of the patients with multiple myeloma are within 50 miles of one of our treatment centers. Now, we think we can probably even expand that footprint, but that's where we are today. So a patient is referred from their community physician or is being treated at one of these authorized treatment centers. This includes sort of the large academic medical centers like you would think about MD Anderson, Memorial Sloan Kettering, et cetera, as well as many, many community hospitals and regional hospitals as well throughout the country. They go for an apheresis, which means we extract from their, from a vein in their arm, the blood product that enables us to isolate the T cells. We take the T cells from that bag of blood and we bring it to our manufacturing facility. We have the manufacturing facilities, as I mentioned, in Europe, but for the U.S. patients, this manufacturing is done in New Jersey at our Raritan, New Jersey facility, as well as we have one other contract manufacturer in New Jersey. But all those cells come to New Jersey manufacturing. Through that process, we are then isolating the T cells, expanding the T cells, and then transducing these T cells to enable them to express on their surface what's called the CAR, the chimeric antigen receptor, That card is basically like a homing device that identifies the BCMA target on myeloma cells. And once those T cells are re-engineered, have the CAR expressed on their surface, they're now CAR T cells. They're considered manufacturing. And through a series of testing and release, and we make sure that the standards and the specifications are met, we are then able to release that product back to the hospital. The hospital calls up the patient and says, your cells are ready. The patient comes back in for their appointment, and it's a very short infusion time for them to get their cells back. Now, you asked about whether patients have to be admitted to the hospital. There's really an opportunity to do this without inpatient admission. We look at across all of the claims data that comes in for Carvykti, and we see that about half of the patients are having the infusion of Carvykti done in the outpatient setting.
Interesting.
So, it really depends on how the hospital wants to set it up. Oftentimes the hospital, for their own protocols, wants to have the patient stay overnight for the infusion, but it's not required. And that's one of the big revolutions with Carvykti, that you can do it in the outpatient setting, and that enables more and more patients to have it done, in different types of settings.
Carvykti, is it considered a second line therapy at this point? You mentioned you have to refractory on the initial treatment. So is it considered a second line therapy?
Yes, it is. So after the initial trials were done in the later lines, in the fifth line plus, one of the big watermarks for Carvykti was the fact that we demonstrated overall survival data, and then were approved in patients as early as second line. So anyone who has had a progression off of their first line treatment those patients are now eligible for Carvykti. So it's second line plus. And one of the things that we're finding is that we get better outcomes, whether it's efficacy, whether it's safety, and also in terms of the manufacturing of the cells. All those things are improved the earlier you get the treatment in your journey. So, we've demonstrated data, and we had some data at the recent American Society of Hematology meeting that is pretty clear that earlier is better when it comes to treatment of CAR T.
Okay. And, your job, your task is to expand the market for Carvykti. And, part of the reason I was asking about, second line opportunity for Carvykti is I'm wondering kind of just how you do that. You're not out building new manufacturing sites, but there is opportunity to obviously expand the market for Carvykti. And so I'm curious about, Alan, what you're focusing on, how you do that with an autologous CAR T therapy, what your approach is to expanding this market. Are you doing things like DTC advertising, for example?
Yeah, so the way we think about it is expanding both the supply as well as the demand side, and as you said, expanding the market in terms of educating patients and capturing more patients who are eligible. So on the supply side, again, I shared a little bit about this before, but we're very excited to say that we have the commercial production both in the US and Europe, and we're really supply unconstrained now. We have the facilities that will enable us to scale and grow the capacity as the demand grows. So we have now our turnaround time is down, our manufacturing success rate is up. It's about 97% of the time we're able to successfully manufacture the cells. So we really have a very reliable process now that's providing a good patient experience. And I would argue that we've got the best in class manufacturing. I know some of the competition out there likes to tout their manufacturing capabilities, but we've been doing this now for years and years with BCMA. We've treated 10,000 patients, and we have a manufacturing success rate that's 97% plus. So we're very confident in the ability to supply the market. Now let's pivot over to the other side, which you were asking about, which was the demand side. How do we continue to expand the market? This is all about education. This is all about awareness, because CAR T is sort of viewed, even if you've heard of it, and not many patients have heard of it, and even some of the community physicians are not quite familiar with it.
Sure.
If they've heard about it, they might think, well, this is sort of that very specialized treatment that only certain centers can do. That's the big gun. That's where I go for as a last resort. We're trying through a lot of education and working with our scientific partners to say, we need to think about this disease differently. We have a potential with a one-time infusion to give very long-term remissions, to get patients off of treatment, to give them the shot at a cure. Why wouldn't we do this earlier? And in fact, the earlier we do it, the healthier the patients are, they get a better efficacy outcome, the safety issues are significantly mitigated, the manufacturing is improved, and you get patients who are, as opposed to, as one of the physicians said to me, if I can give a patient years of being off treatment so they can travel and they can enjoy time, wouldn't I want to do that with a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old rather than with an 80-year-old? I mean, let's give life back to as many patients as we can. And so that's why the earlier use is really something that is starting to take hold.
So education and awareness. What are the what are your tools?
Yeah.
The arrows in your quiver for that. It's not as someone who's married to a high school science teacher, I know that education can be a difficult process sometimes to communicate. What are you trying to what tools are you using, I guess, Alan, to expand, to generate awareness amongst, physicians that may not be aware of it or aren't thinking of it as a second line option, or for patients who may, be, don't really understand what a CAR T therapy is, if they even know what it is, and may have some reservations about, such a new kind of process for getting treatment.
So to the provider community, and that's specifically not only those who are in the authorized treatment centers that we stand up, but then also in the referring base, right? All those community physicians. There are about 3,000 heme practices out there that are referring into the major centers. We do some of the traditional education and awareness. Ourselves and J&J have field teams that are dedicated to Carvykti, that are working on delivering the scientific information, that are doing the sales, that are doing the medical information. We have nurse educators in the marketplace that are helping the nursing community understand how to navigate patients and how to manage patients. We are also, and I know you asked this before, we are doing, and this is a first for CAR T, we are doing direct consumer education and awareness. We're not doing it on the traditional TV programs. You see a lot of commercials on TV. We're doing that through dedicated channels. We're doing it through streaming. We're doing it through video on demand. We're using social media. These are all ways that we are reaching patients. And we're obviously doing it in a very compliant and thoughtful way. And the most important thing for us is less about Carvykti, because again, we're already the leader. It's really about the fact that there is an option for patients who have relapsed on their current treatment to get a one-time infusion that enables them to have very good outcomes. And obviously, we communicate benefit risk. We do that in a very balanced way. But the education is all about there's this option for you. In fact, we had a patient come talk to our teams recently, and it was really fascinating to hear her talk, because her question to her physicians was not, tell me, doc, what's next, right? It was, tell me what my options are. And if we could get more patients just to have that dialogue with their physicians, and then the physicians are prepared to present, well, you could go on this type of therapy, you could go on a PI, you could go on an IMiD, we could recycle you through another anti-CD38. There's this thing called bispecifics. But we also want to tell you about this thing called CAR T, educate the patients about what it is, what their experience is going to be, what the advantage of having this treatment is in terms of it being a one and done, and then leaving it up to a shared decision making with the patient, their family, and the physician. That's a win. I mean, to me, that's a win, and that's what we're shooting for.
Well, there may be some additional options for patients in this category pretty soon. Pipeline competitors. I had Cindy Peretti from Kite on the show recently. Of course, the big news in late February is that Gilead is acquiring Arcellx for $7.8 billion, I believe. Arcellx and Kite are collaborating on a BCMA CAR T for multiple myeloma. It's in late clinical stages. As the category leader, Alan, how do you prepare for the pending approval of that product or other competing products?
We've been preparing for a long time for it, and whenever they do get approved, and if they get approved, we'll be ready. And in fact, people have asked us about that acquisition, and I think we've shared that really validates the value of this space, of the potential for the myeloma market to be transformed by CAR T. And for us, it's not a zero-sum game. There are about 100,000 patients across the U.S. and developed markets around the world that are second line plus. That's an enormous opportunity. Today we've only treated 10,000. And that's longitudinally, right? So we've only scratched the surface in terms of this market of 100,000 patients. And so, when we think about competition, we think about being ready versus competition, and I'll share some of our thoughts about that. But we also think about growing the pie, right? Growing the opportunity for CAR Ts to get to more patients through, again, broader reach into the community, more awareness, driving the referrals, but then also bringing CAR T administration into the community setting, expanding it in more markets. Right now, we're in the U.S. and 13 markets outside the U.S., some of the major markets in Europe, such as Germany, Spain, Belgium, Denmark, but we have plans to go even further beyond that. And so expanding it geographically and bringing access to CAR T to many more patients. Now, specifically as it relates to that competitor that you mentioned, and they just got a PDUFA date, a standard review, not a priority review, I should mention, but a standard review for the end of December. We're very ready, and I think we're feeling really good about the fact that they're showing data in the maybe 100 to 150 patients in their clinical study. It's intriguing, but we've treated 10,000 patients. So, and I think that when we show sort of that, when we have that discussion to physicians, what we hear back is, any new product is going to get a lot of excitement. That's the name of the game in oncology. People are always looking for what's next. But what they also want to know is this a tested treatment? What's going to happen in the real world? We all know that in clinical studies, things are very curated. There's a lot of selection bias in the patients. But especially in a space where we're perturbing the immune system, we're revving up T cells, we're re-engineering T cells. You really have to see what happens in the real world with real patients. And now 10,000 patients later, I think we have a really good idea of what the AE profile looks like for a CAR T and the best practices on how to mitigate and manage that. And so it's the maturity of the data, the long-term follow-up, the efficacy that we've shown. I think these things are all going to really matter when we get a competitor.
Great. J&J also has its own clinical candidates, which could, you tell me, potentially compete with Carvykti, I think. How do you think about that possibility at Legend, and is it something that you discuss with J&J?
Well, I talked before about options, and more options for patients are always better. And there is a new option, and J&J now has an approval for a combination of teclistamab, which is a BCMA bispecific, as well as daratumumab, which is their anti-CD38 mAb, the Tec-Dara combination, if you will. And
okay, that's approved. Okay.
Yeah, it just got approved actually very recently. Great news for patients. Congratulations to my partners at J&J. And again, the way we think about this is options for patients. Now, the good news is there's going to be a place for both treatment modalities for patients in the second line plus. But as it relates to Carvykti, one of the things that's really important is the sequencing. And so there's a working group of myeloma experts called the IMWG, the International Myeloma Working Group, a set of thought leaders who get together and make recommendations for the treatment of the disease. Like any other disease category, we have these working groups, and the IMWG has recommended that when it comes to sequencing, that patients should be assessed, evaluated, and if possible, get to CAR T first. BCMA CAR T first before a BCMA bispecific. And the reason is because the data shows that if you do BCMA bispecific first, you're potentially wearing out, if you will, and exhausting that T cell population, and you don't get as good of an effect with CAR T. In addition, the IMWG has commented that, if you have the opportunity to give patients a one-time infusion, get them off treatment, as opposed to with the bispecifics, it's continuous treatment, why wouldn't you offer that to patients and get more patients to that? So, sequencing is really important here. I think, Carvykti has a very strong position in the market in terms of its profile, in terms of this recommendation, in terms of the support we have and the data we have. And so, welcome competitors, great news for patients to have options, but Carvykti is very well positioned here.
Is there a possible world where Carvykti moves in, or another CAR T therapy moves into first line for BCMA, multiple myeloma? And I think, and correct me on this if I'm wrong, I think the first line is what, chemo or radiation, or what's the first line? And is that something that you guys are thinking about or even trialing?
There are about 30,000 patients in the U.S. who are treated for newly diagnosed multiple myeloma or first line. And we have two studies that are now fully enrolled, our CARTITUDE-5 study and our CARTITUDE-6 study, looking at this frontline population. It'll take a couple of years for the full data sets to read out, but the two trials are in two different categories, if you will. One is the patients who are getting transplant as their first line treatment. And so autologous stem cell transplant is the standard of care for patients in the front line. And so we're asking the question, can CAR T replace stem cell transplant as a frontline treatment? So that's the CARTITUDE-6 data set. But only about a quarter of the patients, of the 30,000 patients, get that. The 3/4 of the patients either are ineligible for transplant because their performance status or are not planned for transplant or choose not to do it, because transplant is a very difficult regimen. It's very difficult on the body. Patients have to be hospitalized. They get high dose melphalan. It's very toxic chemo to basically wipe out their stem cells so that the new stem cells can be reintroduced. And so a lot of patients choose not to do it or are not clinical candidates. And so for that population, we have the CARTITUDE-5 study where we are looking at, we are going against the standard of care, a triplet regimen with a DARA-based regimen, as well as Velcade and dexamethasone. And so these are the uses in frontline that then we are seeing whether CAR T can improve upon in terms of outcomes.
Got it. All right. Before I let you go, Alan, I wanted to ask about Legend's pipeline and also your top priorities for 2026. So maybe first, what are the pipeline highlights? What are you excited about there?
Also, we've been starting to talk more and more about our pipeline. In fact, on our recent earnings call, we shared our plans that this year in 2026, we will present for the first time clinical data for our in vivo platform. And if you think about all the things we were talking about in terms of autologous CAR T, where we bring the cells to a manufacturing plant, make sure that the cells are re-engineered and reinfuse them into the patient, in vivo changes the game. It's a complete disruption of that. It is actually using the body as the manufacturing plant. We do the in vivo injection of the lentivirus and the ways to transduce the T cells in the body. We don't have to bring it outside. We don't have to have lymphodepletion. We don't have to wait a month. And then that potential treatment then is having the T cells express the right antigen on the surface, finding the cancer and killing it. We announced that we are going to present for the first time our clinical data in 2026 of our early in vivo programs. We're looking at it in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, as well as myeloma. And we are starting those studies. And again, this is the great model that Legend has. We're starting those studies in China. And then as we share that data, we will then bring those into IND-enabling studies in the U.S. and then moving it into global studies as well. So that's a key highlight for our pipeline, which is our in vivo platform. We also have allogeneic programs. So the allo part of CAR T, it's other donors who are giving their T cells or NK cells. And we have that as part of our program. We're also looking at solid tumors, not just, blood cancers. And also we are exploring autoimmune disease because there's been some really fascinating data that CAR T can actually do an immune reset for patients such as those who might have lupus or other serious autoimmune disorders. So the field for CAR T is really just exploding at this point. We had the leader in autologous CAR T, but Legend is not, wanting to rest on its leadership position there. We're thinking about the future and whether it's allo, whether it's other tumor types, whether it's other diseases, and very excitingly, whether it's in vivo. These are some of the things that we're exploring.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent, Alan. It's a really interesting company, and I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Ben, thanks so much. This has been great.
We've been speaking with Alan Bash, president of Carvykti at Legend Biotech. I'm Ben Comer, and you've just listened to the Business of Biotech. Find us and subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts, and make sure to check out our new weekly video casts of these conversations every Monday under the Business of Biotech tab at lifescienceleader.com. We'll see you next week, and thanks as always for listening.